Hey guys, so here we are. This is going to be a little bit about skipping with a casting rod. If you're like a lot of guys, you get really frustrated. You're going to end up with a lot of bird's nests when you start out. It's normal. You're just going to have to push through it. Practice makes perfect. But there are a few things that will make starting out a little bit easier for you, and I'm going to go over that in this video. First off, I just want to say thank you for sticking with me thus far. My boat is in the wrap shop, which is why I'm not sitting in it right now, and I have a table set up. But that should be getting going here pretty soon. I'm headed to Alabama at the end of the week and should get some on-the-water footage. But let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is rod selection, and this is probably the most important part of your whole skipping setup in general. You want to go with a little bit shorter rod than you're used to. For a lot of techniques, you're going to be using rods that are 7 foot and over, sometimes close to 8 feet. With skipping rods, you want to bring that below 7 feet. This one here is a 6/8 heavy fast by FX Custom Rods. What that shorter rod is going to do, it's going to make it easier to do that little flick of the wrist technique with skipping. You don't need a big giant sweeping sidearm to get a good skip in. It works, but it's not going to work in every situation. That little wrist flick technique will, and this rod actually makes that 10 times easier than it would be with a normal rod. The tip on it is pretty flexible, and it actually helps fling the jig for you, and it's working for you. The heavy action is pretty important when I'm skipping, because when you get under a piece of cover, whether it be a stick, a log, a dock, you want to be able to get into that fish and get them away from the cover as fast as you can, because you want to fight them in open water. You don't want to fight that fish around the cover that he was in, because he's going to get you all wrapped up and tangled and everything, and you're going to get broken off and you're going to get mad, and nobody likes doing that. So that's a little bit about the rod, and it's, like I said, it's probably the most important part to have. The next thing I want to get into is the line that you're using. For me, the majority of the time I'm going to be using 20-pound fluorocarbon, and P-Line Tactical is my line of choice. Whatever you prefer is fine, but that's just mine. The reason why I go with 20-pound is because when you're fishing by cover, I don't want to leave anything on my part that I could have done different to get a fish out. And trust me, the line size is not going to make that much of a difference when you're skipping jigs by docks, because there's more than likely more than one fish that wants that, and the first one that gets to it is going to eat that jig. Another thing it helps with is when you're skipping under docks, you're going to be around dock posts, and who knows what kind of jaggedy jungle gym that is underneath there. You want to have that line size to your advantage, because if it scrapes on it, and it's gonna, when the fish eats the jig, usually it's going to swim around under there, and it could get you rubbing against stuff. That bigger line size is going to help you get that fish away from the dock without completely breaking on you. You can get away with 15. What I would recommend as far as like setting the hook, if you go lighter than 20 pound, is lean into them, feel the fish, and don't slack line them at all, because you're just going to break off on whatever it was. But if you slowly lean into them and give them a pressure set, more than likely you're going to be able to get that fish out from underneath there. And if you've ever done it, you'll know what I'm talking about. You set the hook and just line comes back. That's because he had you wrapped around at a 90-degree angle to a post underneath a dock or a piece of cover, and he broke you off doing that. But if you do that pressure set, chances are that you can get that fish away from there and then fight them. Reels. On my personal setup, I have a Daiwa Tatula Elite 8-to-1. I like that higher gear ratio for the same reason I like 20-pound P-Line, so I can pull them out from underneath that dock as fast as I can and fight them in open water. It's really your personal preference. I just like this because it's light and compact, and it fits in my hand real easy and makes it easier to do close quarters things with it. When you set your reel up, you want to set your spool pretty loose so that jig can do what it needs to do to get underneath that dock. There's a few things that you can do when you're starting out to make birds' nests less frequent. You can go out in your yard, take a cast with your skipping rod, take that longest cast that you have, add 10 feet, and only put that amount of line on your rod. That'll make it so when you get a bird's nest, it's not so much line to pick out, and you're not throwing away a whole spool of line if it's a really bad one. Another thing that you can do is the same thing. Go in your yard, take a cast, add 10 feet, and then take a piece of electrical tape, go around your spool once, and then cut a slot in the electrical tape, run your line through it and tape it down, and that'll do the same thing as with only running a certain amount of line, except that your thumb gets used to having a full spool and your the pressure that you need to put down on it, and it'll make learning again without the tape later a little easier. So now I'm going to get into jig selection. Personally, I use a normal flipping jig. They make actual skipping jigs with a more rounded head on them, which makes it a little easier to skip. But personally, I like just a normal flipping jig because I can use it for more than one thing. I can use it for fishing cover. I can use it for fishing undercover. Anything that I need to do is on one setup. If I need to take a quick cast at something else, I can. As far as trailers go, you want to get something that is going to be threaded onto the hook, because that's going to create something for the bait to skip on. If you use a chunk trailer, it's going to be flopping around on the back and it's going to be hitting the water, and you're not going to get the distance out of the cast that you would normally get if you used a bait that you could thread onto the hook. Now, as far as jig size, when you're starting out, it's easier to go heavier first. So start out with like a 1/2 ounce jig and try skipping with that, and once you get good at that, slowly work your way down. Personally, most of the time for me, I'm skipping a 3/16 ounce jig, and I find that it has the best fall rate for underneath cover. The fish like that smaller profile, and that's another thing about the trailer itself. You want it compact and kind of small, so when you're skipping, it's less friction on the water and you can get more distance out of the cast. And that's a few things about jigs. Trailers, it's pretty much whatever you like. I have Chigger Craw on this one. I'll also use Strike King trailers, Ridge trailers. Sometimes I'll use Zoom trunks. It kind of depends on the situation and how much action those fish want on the bait at the time. But that's a few things that'll help you guys get started. I hope you found some use out of this video. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I probably missed a bunch of things, and I'm sure some people's opinions differ from what mine is on a skipping setup, but this is what's worked for me for years, and this is probably what I'll be using for a long time to come. But thank you for watching this, and I hope you got something out of it. If you did, give it a like, maybe subscribe, and thank you guys.